All right, thank you all for coming in, and I hope you are enjoying yourselves as we transition from our beginning networking session and move into the program. So firstly, thank you all for coming out to our second annual NYCOBA-NOMA Black History Month celebration and panel this evening. I'm Allison Lane, your NYCOBA-NOMA president for 2023 and this year for 2024. On behalf of the NYCOBA-NOMA Executive Board and leadership, we're excited to have you here today to share with us in the exploration of history of Black architects in New York. Thank you to those who are here in person and also those of you tuning in online to join us as well. The breadth and depth of NYCOBA-NOMA is filled with invaluable history, which is often unsung. This history includes the amazing triumphs of our pioneering Black architects and, of course, pain points, as both NYCOBA and NOMA were originally founded by Black firms in the 1970s to band together to pursue equitable opportunities for their firms due to very few opportunities to work at non-minority firms and low glass ceilings at these firms. Unfortunately, many of these issues still persist, as Black architects make up only 1.8% of licensed architects in the United States, and that number of Black women architects is only 0.4%. The creation of our annual NYCOBA-NOMA Black History Month program is essential to exhibit the histories, stories, and projects of our foundational Black architects even before the 70s, including reflections from some of our legendary Black architects practicing today. Yes, we as architects are consistently striving towards increased innovation on all fronts, including technology, sustainability, and resiliency, just to name a few. However, I firmly believe that there is no future of design without understanding the past and the profound contributions put forth by our Black architects. Our evening tonight is entitled Black in Architecture: Conversations, Histories, and Reflections from NYCOBA, the New York Coalition of Black Architects, which later became NYCOBA-NOMA when we joined NOMA in 1992 officially. We have an amazing guest panel, including Jack Travis, Roberta Washington, Gregory Schweitzer, and Mark Barksdale. After the conversations, we'll have a panel moderated by myself, as well as Stephen Wilder, our NYCOBA-NOMA president-elect. And you'll also hear welcoming remarks by Pascal Sablon, our NOMA Global President, as well as Priyanka Jain, our AIANY New York Diversity and Inclusion Co-Chair. Before we dive into the program, I just wanted to acknowledge our sponsors for this evening. Of course, we want to thank the Center for Architecture and AIANY New York, including the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, for your unwavering support through shared programming and MOUs. We really appreciate our collaboration with you, so thank you. Additionally, I'd like to also thank Nicole Holland-Dennis, one of our NYCOBA-NOMA members, as well as president and founder of Aris Design Architects. I'd also like to mention our additional patrons, Ken Lewis, as well as Wayne Benjamin, and also shout out our vendors, our Black-owned vendors, Boulevard Bistro of Harlem, as well as Jamel Charles Photography. In addition to our speakers and sponsors, I'd also like to express a few additional thank yous to individuals instrumental in putting the evening together tonight, including Mel Loyola Augusto, our NYCOBA-NOMA historian, Vanessa Alicia Chicky, and Brad DeBose of NYCOBA-NOMA, as well as Suzanne Max, Jesse Lazar, Evelyn Serrano, and Samantha Kaba from AIANY New York and the Center for Architecture. Here's a brief slide of our program for this evening. Again, we'll have welcomes by Pascal, our NOMA Global President, as well as Priyanka Jain, the D&I Committee Co-Chair from AIANY New York. And then we'll have a series of conversations. The first part themed Black in Architecture and NYCOBA history will be presented by both Roberta Washington and Mark Barksdale. And then we'll have a second conversation paired with Jack Travis and Gregory Schweitzer surrounding Black men in architecture and glass ceilings at firms. Following that, Stephen and I will join all four panelists to ask them some questions regarding their reflections and remarks, as well as open it up for some audience Q&A, and then we will close. So with that said, thank you again for joining. Thank you again to our panelists, our volunteers, everyone. And now I'd like to call up Pascal Sablon, our NOMA Global President.
Good evening. Happy to be here and happy to see you all. We've taken this moment to appreciate the documentation of our history and our legacy. I need you to understand that you yourself embody excellence in the work that you do and the way you contribute to the built environment and to our profession. I am not going to talk long. We have lots of speakers, but I do want to say, as your NOMA president, I'm really excited that part of my initiative was to become global, right? To push the boundaries of what cages us, what binds us in terms of our contributions and the opportunities that we have at our fingertips. It's important that we see ourselves in these spaces, in these places, and claiming those opportunities in the work that we're doing. Also want to say that NOMA is growing. We're reaching the highest and largest number of members and excessively growing in terms of our chapters, which is all great. But to be very honest and clear, I'm not a president that really cares about how big we are. I want to know that we're doing powerful things for you. I want to know that we're dismantling obstructions in your pathway. I want to make sure that you know that we're elevating you. And I want to make sure that you walk away saying, wow, NOMA has blown open these doors for me, and now I'm well positioned to reach my dreams. So that could be 10 of us, 100 of us, 2,000, whatever, but we need to be all centered around mission. And that's the type of president that you have before you. And that is why I'm super, super proud to have these discussions, to participate and be in the audience, to learn, to take notes, to understand what we've done. It's not that we're being introduced to this profession. No, we built this country. We built this world. And here we have this amazing contributions and talents who have documented that for us. But what I'm urging you in this moment as your president is that you document your path. You document what you've done. And not in a timid, I did this. No, I am great. I am amazing. I've done this. And anyone who tells you different, you point them to me and I'll take care of it. Yeah? All right, with that, I'll let the next panel welcome speaker to come over. Thank you.
Definitely not going to match that energy. As the co-chair of Diversity and Inclusion Committee, a very warm welcome to you all, and immensely grateful for both Allison and Pascal to bring this event to AIA and to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. In my 10 years of practice focusing on community-centered design, I see every day how diverse perspectives lead to meaningful change, but how also absence of it lead to perpetuating inequities. And I'm immensely excited as 4 architects today share their journey, share an aesthetic vocabulary that they built rooted in local culture and shared experiences. And not just bringing representation, but also, I hope, and personally for me in their journeys, I see being able to go beyond barriers, being a steadfast conviction, a passion, and the ability to bring that vocabulary and be able to show that this is what we need today to be able to make any kind of transformative change in our communities. So I'm going to end there and invite Mark Barksdale and Roberta Washington.
Oh.
So you guys want to take the center seats?
What do I do?
So this is just forward and backward.
Okay. You want me to sit?
Oh yeah, you guys can take the 2 center seats there.
Okay.
But I want to
For this part, I'll stand here. Okay, okay. I'm going to start, I guess. Or do you want to? You can.
Yeah, just a sec. We'll get it together. So good evening, everyone. It's I'm delighted to be here for this event, and it's great to be here on this platform with my colleagues and friends who I've known for many, many years. And I'm delighted that all of you came out tonight, and I'm delighted that we are being seen live stream through the internet, and hopefully this will be taped for posterity. But I want to thank Allison Lane for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's great, and it's great to have Pascal, our global president of NOMA, to be with us tonight. It's a very special occasion to get the president of our organization to be here. I'll thank Priyanka for co-sponsoring the event. I'd like to thank Jesse Lazar and Suzanne Mex for allowing us to use the space. And Allison mentioned that, there are only, out of all the architects in the country, only 1.8% of the architects are Black or African American. So tonight is a special occasion, a very special occasion, because it's not only Black History Month, and we're doing this Black History event tonight, but we have many, many licensed Black architects in the audience tonight. So being that we only represent 1.8% of all the architects in the country, it's a special night to get so many out in one occasion. So this event is a historic event in itself. So I just want to, I got to move along. So I just want to set the context for what we're going to be discussing tonight, and talk a little bit about the who and the what of my existence and being, and how I came to be an architect. My name is, again, Mark Barksdale, and I'm originally from Washington, D.C., but I was raised in New York City. So I have the perspective of both D.C., which is a southern city because it's located below the Mason-Dixon line. And I was born during the era of Jim Crow segregation, when Harry Truman was president of the United States. And many of you are young and probably don't even know what the experience was to live in a segregated society, but it really limited our opportunities and the opportunities that we had to even become not only professional, but just anything in society. Our schools were segregated, our housing was segregated, even swimming pools were segregated. So that's the environment in which I was born in. I was born at a time even before the Brown versus Board of Education decision was made by the Supreme Court of the United States, which ended separate but equal. So at the time I was born, we were still in the throes of racial segregation in this country. And so the opportunities were very limited for us to even think about becoming a professional. So I want to go to the first slide. So this is a slide of Vert Tandy. Okay, so Vert Tandy, a lot of people know Vert Tandy as the first Black registered architect in New York State. There's maybe some, Roberta will be able to explain a little bit more about that, but a lot of folks recognize Vert Tandy as being among the first Black architects in New York State. And he was responsible for designing St. Philip's Church in Harlem, which is a landmark, New York City landmark, which is maybe the only New York City landmark designed by a Black architect that's recognized by a New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. He also designed the mansion for Madam C.J. Walker. The name of the mansion that Leroy, yes, which he's probably most known for. And I happen to be a member of St. Philip's Church, so I'm very familiar with Vert Tandy as the architect of the church. And he got to design that church in maybe only 3 years after he graduated from Cornell University, which is pretty remarkable to get a major commission like that of a historic structure. So he is certainly very influential in my life as an architect. And we go to the next slide. This is, oh, I'm sorry. These are Roberta's slides. Okay. I should turn it over to Roberta. Yes, let me turn it over. These are Roberta's slides, so let me turn it over to Roberta, and she can go through her slides, and I'll come back.
He'll be right back. Okay. So as you see, what I chose to do with my time for this evening was to, I would say, remind you of the history of Black architects in New York City, New York State. But in a sense, it's not even reminding you because you didn't, most of you have like very little knowledge of it at all. So it may be learning for the first time. When I was thinking about becoming an architect, one of the things I wondered about was, well, first of all, were there any Black architects? Because I didn't see them easily. I had teachers at Howard, of course, who were African American, and so I felt that was proof. But I often wondered about what was the first man, and I'm going to say man because probably it was, after the Civil War, Black man, what was he thinking when he decided, hey, I think I'll be an architect, you know? Where did he get that energy? Where did he get that hopefulness that there was a career out there for him, right? At that time, there were very few. There was only one Black architect that I know of in Washington, D.C., who was working at the end of the Civil War, right? But just 10 or 15 years later, there were several Black architects. And I wonder, like, did they see people working as Black architects? Men, probably. And decide that that's for them, or what, right? In New York, because I've been a longtime member of NYCOBA, I got to talk to and know many of the members who are no longer with us, who were all really excited and who were really very enthused about the profession that they'd chosen. And they thought that being in New York was really hip, not just because it was hip, but because there were so many African-American architects, many being, you know, in quotes, Black architects in this city compared to other cities. And so what I wanted to do is to run through really fast some of those people who were the pioneers in terms of breaking into an architectural practice here. And I think that one of the things that you'll notice that I was talking about men, but New York City was also an important place for Black women who also had that same dream. And so we're going to meet some of those too. Okay, so this is George Washington Foster, who was a partner in the design of the Mother AME Zion Church with Tandy. But as far as we know, Tandy was one of the earliest Black architects to practice in New York. But according to his bio that he wrote and read at a conference, he worked in other places. Both he and Foster worked in New Jersey, and they were licensed in New Jersey before they came to New York. But what we know about is mostly about what happened to them in New York, and who their clients were here. But I still think that there's a lot to be discovered in other places. But so George Washington Foster was a partner. It lasted for several years, but George Washington Foster Jr. was actually here before Tandy and worked with several noted white architectural firms and had experience before he started working with Tandy. And now I'm going to hope that this goes to the next slide. It doesn't, no. Okay. One of the projects that's noted for those who followed Tandy is John Lewis Wilson. Okay, all right. Okay, was the Harlem River housing, which was one of the first big projects and city or governmental projects that an African-American architect worked on. And Wilson was a Columbia graduate, and he was the first African-American to receive an AIA fellowship in New York, right from New York. Then, time is moving right ahead. We look at the practice of Eiffel Johnson Hanchard, and they were a firm that had connections, right? They had connections both with churches, with organizations, but they wanted to do bigger and bigger projects. And through many political dealings and circumstances that came before them, they were able to go after and get the project of the state office building. And because of the size and the cost, there was a lot of discussion about who should get the job. And at first, it was only contractors who were, black contractors who were invited to be involved in the construction. But due to popular demand and a few sit-ins, Eiffel Johnson Hanchard got that job. And they got other jobs too. Bond Ryder Architects. These are two guys who met up here who wanted to have their own firm and who wanted to work without limitations, right? In a time when there still were some limitations. But these are some of their projects, the projects that they're responsible for. Like other architects before them, they pretty much had to fight to get the bigger projects. Times have changed, and so now it's more likely that just because a firm is African American, they can still compete. But it's not quite yet the level field that I think people are wanting to see. Okay. This is Robert Coles, who is an architect who who lived in Buffalo and worked out of Buffalo, but who worked in New York. And there are a couple of projects there that show his New York City work as well as his work in other parts of the state and the country. And he was very involved with NOMA, and he also served as the AIA's Chancellor of Fellows. But his idea for working was not to get all the big jobs himself, but to collaborate, to find other people who he could collaborate with, which is another technique, which apparently also pays some dividends. Okay. And yes, there were women here. In fact, the very first woman licensed as an architect worked in New York City after she worked in Chicago. In Chicago, she worked for the Public Housing Authority. She was the first woman named to work with the Public Housing Authority, and she was in charge of the Ida B. Wells housing development there, which is like a little known story, but Black architects and drafters were involved in the Ida B. Wells housing development. And it has to do with, politics and things, but the communities fought for that participation, and it worked, but it's not noted or it's not written about as much as it should be. But after she left Chicago, to come to New York City, and she then joined an organization that had just formed, which was CANA, the Council for the Advancement of the Negro in Architecture, which came from another organization started by some members of the AIA, the local AIA. And although those, there weren't any Black or few Black members of the AIA at that time, the people who were really aggressive and who thought that it was time to move to do something with the participation of Black folks as architects did. And they helped start this organization called CANA, which in the end folded back into the AIA as another organization, as a committee. This is the second licensed Black woman this is the first in New York City, and she was also in New York State, and she was also the first Black woman licensed in California. And there was another woman just ahead of her. But in terms of her work and her, and the fact that she's well known, NOMA was one of the hardest working women there were, who was kicking down doors for not just for herself, but for other Black women and for women and for students. She wasn't like, she didn't let herself be confined to think of what she did only in terms of Black female, but for those of us who look at what she did in the past, we see that that helped. This is Robert Wilson, who was one of the NOMA NOMA founders, rather, and he was very involved in construction and design, not only in New York City but also in Connecticut. And J. Johnson is another member of NYCOBA and also NOMA, and he's a NOMA founder, and he worked from Poughkeepsie, New York. And last, I'm just talking about James Doman, who was very active in the founding and the organizing of NYCOBA in the beginning. Okay, so that's, I think that's my time, right? And somebody else's time too. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. I apologize. So we had a little mix-up in terms of the formatting for tonight's program, but I wanted to go back to set the context for how we became architects, and Roberta and I came out of, we were both born in the South, and so our families had to endure the Jim Crow segregation of the South, and even in D.C., which is the capital of the United States, it was a segregated town. In fact, in D.C., Washington, D.C. was the town where if you were traveling, but remember, this is an era in the 1950s and before the 1950s where most people were traveling by train rather than, there wasn't really much air travel in those days, to really put this in context. So in D.C. was the station where Black passengers had to switch to segregated cars to go any further south, into the South. Out of this context, our opportunities were limited, very limited. Even to become an architect, that was like, unthinkable. So these are my grandparents, and they were both born in the South. My grandfather, Jarvis Seabrook, was born in Charleston, and his mother was born into slavery. So that makes me the great grandson of an enslaved person. My grandmother was born in Wilmington, North Carolina. She was the daughter of an enslaved person who was born on a peanut plantation. My grandfather's mother was born on a rice plantation in South Carolina. So this context, is always in the back of my mind. They moved to Harlem to escape the oppression and the violence of organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. And in the early 1900s, they were part of the Great Migration out of the South. They came to Harlem, which was the great Black Mecca, the capital of Black America, in the early 20th century. And they married and established a family. And my grandmother's holding her firstborn, who was born in 1918, November of 1918. So you can put a date to that photograph. So it was taken just after their child was born. And then they had two other children after that, one of them being my mother, and she would always say she was born and raised in Harlem. So I have that as part of my legacy, historical legacy. And my grandmother was a member of St. Philip's Church, so I'm like a third generation member. So, but they had to escape the South, particularly with my grandmother, who was from Wilmington, because in 1898 they had a massacre. There was a mob of 2,000 white men who took over the downtown of Wilmington, North Carolina, and burned all the black businesses in Wilmington, and killed anywhere between 60 and 250 black people in Wilmington. So, many of us have heard about Tulsa and the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but they were massacres that happened all over this country in the 19th century as well as the 20th century, even as recently as Tops Supermarket in Buffalo, New York. And there was a massacre in a church in Charleston of 9 people who died of that. And the Tops Supermarket, I think at least 10 people died in that massacre. So there's been a history of violence against black people in this country. And so that's the context in which I was raised. And this is the man, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who had a great influence on me, because he came along at a time where he was really the leader who started the modern day civil rights movement. As part of he became the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. But before then, there was little hope that segregation would end in this country. So Brown versus Board of Education was decided by the Supreme Court in 1954, which is a huge thing because it overturned one of their previous decisions that's created separate but equal, the Plessy versus the Ferguson decision in 1896, and that decision stood until 1954. So it was a big thing for the Supreme Court to overturn one of their own decisions, and by a 9-0 unanimous decision. I'm going to go quickly, but I got to meet that center photograph. It's a photograph I took of Dr. King when I was a teenager in D.C. when he came to speak at a rally. One of the influential things in my life was a book by Ralph Ellison called Invisible Man, and that's a theme that runs throughout American history. As black folks, we tend to be invisible in society. We see in the next slide that there was an article written in Architecture magazine in April 1991 called Invisible Architects. So we've had the feeling of being invisible in this profession. Robert Traynham Coles, who Roberta had mentioned before, wrote an article in Progressive Architecture called Black Architects, an Endangered Species. Here we have Bert Netanya again, who designed St. Philip's Church and Villa Lawaro for Madam C.J. Walker. This is one of my mentors, Arthur J. Symes. He was the first full-time black faculty member at the City College School of Architecture. And we had the students, we had a group of black students who formed an organization called Mfanisa, and we had to lobby the administration of City College to actually get him hired as the first black faculty member in a school, City College, that's located in Harlem. They didn't know any black architects, so we had to put together a list for him. John Lewis Wilson is the architect who gave me my first job out of Columbia University after I graduated from the Graduate School of Architecture there. And he, of course, was the architect, one of the architects for Harlem River Houses. He gave me my start in architecture, so I'll always remember that. Max Bond was an influence on me because I first became aware of Max at his firm because of the Lionel Hampton houses, and that was one of the first major developments that a black architect had ever been given in New York City to design. And I also knew him earlier than that because I was an intern at an organization called the Architects Renewal Committee in Harlem, ARCH, and he was the director of that organization. So Max is also known for designing the Dr. Martin Luther King Memorial and Historic Site in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, Alabama, which is located directly across the street from McKelly Ingram Park, where the demonstrations were held in the park. And Bull Connor, the police, the director of public safety for Birmingham, sent out the police with their police dogs and their fire hoses to break up the demonstration. So, and it's also located a block away from the 16th Street Baptist Church, where those 7 little girls were bombed to death in the early 60s. So these are all the influences on my life that helped me, inspired me to become an architect in the city. So I appreciate your attention, and I will turn it over now to our next panel.
Good evening, everyone. I have a sore throat, so please forgive me. I'll try and go fast. But I want to talk to you this evening about being at SOM while black. In my opinion, it was a very, very bittersweet sort of experience, but one that was very lasting and it had a great impression on me in my career, as I'm going to take you through today. So I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. Weird enough. Went to Catholic school 10 out of 12 years. We even had a parish called Our Lady of Las Vegas, and that's when I knew the jig was up. But I grew up in the Las Vegas that you see on the left and not on the right, right? We didn't have any idea that there's a possibility that that could actually happen. Next slide, please. And I grew up on the West Side. In fact, all of us grew up on the West Side back in the 1950s and 1960s. No one was allowed to live off the West Side in Las Vegas if you were black. The first person to ever live in a white neighborhood, Paradise Palms, I remember it, was the fighter Sonny Liston. And then came a couple of more celebrities. But most of us lived there. And I remember growing up here, the people who built my community, the place that I grew up in, the roads weren't paved, the sidewalks weren't paved in the middle 50s. And when we got there, my parents came from Louisiana. They had picked cotton until they were 13. My mother had a 10th grade education, my father 4th grade education in the same building all 4 years with no floor. So in my family, there was nobody to go to college except my sister before me, who became an educator, teacher, and then myself as an architect. So I'm the first professional in the whole clan of the Travis family as I know it. But I grew up here, and I remember them building the neighborhood. And even the guy who cut our hair, Dave was his name, he built his house for his family, and he cut our hair in his little house. Next slide. So I get to school to study architecture, and I see just how white things are in architecture. I went to Catholic school. I went to a privileged school in Las Vegas, as I said before, and the whiteness started in 2nd grade. But when I got to these 2 universities, it was enormous for me. I was very, very much a challenge in the first 2 years of being there. Plus, I played basketball 1 year, a freshman team at Arizona State University. And there was just a lot of disorientation being a black person on the campus. 32,000 at one school, 34,000 at the other school. And the same thing at Champaign, Illinois, very isolated as a black person, but learning a tremendous amount around the idea of architecture, but learning so much about how architecture is produced, how good construction and detailing is produced. You start to, at least in my case I did, start to hate the kind of understanding that you had in the first place around the people who built your neighborhood, because you realized that they weren't building it quote unquote properly. You were being taught to build it properly, and they were doing it improperly. And so you start to see that rift in that divide. And again, when you're asleep, like I was, around the idea of race, because we had just had no one in the area. I didn't even know that there was an HBCNU school that I could go to growing up in Las Vegas. We just didn't have the scholars and the people around the Black Power movement in those early 1960s. So it was very difficult. Next. So I moved on, and I'll just put it this way. Somehow, I got hired at SOM through all of this. And I got hired in the San Francisco office, but I immediately moved to New York City in 1980, and I started in the New York office. We're on Park Avenue, and I went into the interior design department, and I thought I could stay there for a couple of years, go back to architecture, but little did I know that that's not how things are done either. And so I stayed in interior design, and that's where I am today. But it's important for me to point out that I came here and I worked for 2 women who taught me, I think, more about quality design and architecture and design in general than all of the male teachers that I had at Arizona State and University of Illinois. Not that that education wasn't important for me, and not that it didn't have depth around history and structures and the idea of how you build buildings, but the idea of the human body in space, the idea of proportion in furniture and materials, that's what I learned at SOM. I got there in 1980, as I said, and I worked on probably the most significant and prestigious project for the interior design department in the history of the firm at the time. It's the National Commercial Bank of Jeddah. It's King Faisal's personal bank. And I worked on the banking floor in his offices, as well as the main banking floor and the project for over a year and a half. And it was just an incredible project to be on. Some of the things that I learned, and I just wanted to mention these to you very, very briefly, is I learned really what design was all about at this firm. I learned space planning, which I'd never known existed before, or called such. I learned what high-end design truly was. We learned about hardware as if it was just as important as the entire building itself. Materiality, the narrative beyond concept, what it meant to truly care about one's work, about a project, and how a person might use space. I learned about alignment and collaboration and vision and professionalism, how to carry myself as a designer. And with Carol Cohen and Carol Deans Murphy, the 2 women that I worked for, I learned humility. And I learned that my first 2 bosses, being women, I learned the importance of designing the interior, right? I learned respect, not envy, for talents much higher than mine. Next. But it was, as I said, bittersweet. So you heard all about the sweetness, and the bitter is that I was bronze and not golden. right? And the golden boys go forward. Bronze is beautiful, but it's not golden. And so at some point in a firm like that with so much talent, you realize you're only going to go so far. And so I thought to myself, what do I do now that I clearly understand this? And so I was sitting at my desk one day reading a magazine, and this gentleman's father and his firm came up, actually on the cover of Interior Design magazine. And I went around the corner on Madison Avenue. We were on Park Avenue at the time, and I got hired. And it was very, very important for me to work for Lou at that time. It was a transformation, and for all the reasons you've heard before, somebody who looks like you, how important is that? That is extremely important. And I got to do some very, very interesting work, and the first 2 times I was published the first 2 projects that I did for Lou in his office. Here you see the office itself, which I designed some years ago. I think it was Lou's second big office. Yeah. And then next. So then I needed to move on because there were other things that I wanted to do. And this idea of being Black in design became such a connected fervor in my mindset that I needed to be able to get out and explore that. That it wasn't good enough to do good quality design, but I had to do that, plus I had to be an orator and a preacher teacher for the profession. And so I went on to start my own firm in 1985. I'm sorry, I should be speaking in this thing as well. Next. And also, the idea of evolving a Black aesthetic became extremely important to me. So over the last maybe 15 years, I've evolved 10 principles of Black cultural design aesthetic identity that I use in my work and that I share in my lectures basically throughout the entire world, including the continent of Africa. Next. And a few accolades for it. Thank you. So Greg, you were at SOM about a decade after me. How was it for you?
It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. I made some great friendships, but the mentoring that I received there was just absolutely fantastic. And, you know, like Jack was talking about, learning those basic principles of design and the formulas on how to understand space planning and laying out space, it was instrumental in my career moving forward. I can tell you that I had a lot of fun there because the folks that I worked with were really fun and cool. It was a very young bunch at that point in time. There was a big floor of about 200 people, and ceiling heights as tall as, you know, the double height of the mezzanine in this space together. It was a really spectacular space, and got to work on some really interesting projects. Some of them a little, you know, there's a lot of busy work. You know, you got to get the fine work done, right, in order to make the big picture look good. So I worked on a lot of projects like that, but some fun projects. I mean, I worked on a project with Solomon Brothers. It was the chairman's office, John Goodfriend's office. I worked with Tony Mandolfo, who was a designer there. He and I worked on that. We worked on, you know, a private resident for a very big developer here in New York, where he took on, you know, pretty much almost an entire floor in the Lowe's Hotel. That was a very fun project. Union Carbide. There were a lot of, you know, projects that, you know, we really got engaged and involved with. And then the folks that I sat next to ended up becoming partners, like Stephen Apking, and, you know, people there for a long time. So it was a very good experience. And it's really interesting, and I'll segue into my story. You know, I am an architect, a Black architect, born in New York, and had a lot of major changes throughout my life because of family issues and those things that we, you know, tend to go through. So you try and make the best of all of the worlds that you're presented to. I was born in the Bronx, and I showed this picture because it's somewhat emblematic of what was going on architecturally as well in the Bronx. You had these huge towers in the park with asphalt basketball courts and asphalt tennis courts and, you know, parking. And this was my first home. I moved from the Bronx to Manhattan. And it's interesting because I lived on Harlem River Drive in some of the very same houses that you saw that were designed up here this evening. And we moved from the Harlem River houses to the Polo Grounds, and then from the Polo Grounds to 69th Street and 2nd Avenue in Manhattan. There was a point in time in my life, like I said, there's, that little disruption, and I was sent down south to my grandparents. And that's where I really learned a lot about myself. Growing up in New York, and I've always had that image of being an architect. Ever since I could talk and walk, I knew I wanted to be an architect. I used to play on the drafting board, take the templates and draw pretty pictures and copy cartoons and just do all of this, and had a good support group. Oh, could you draw a picture for me and sign it for me? And this is what family does to kind of help support you in that process. And when I went to South Carolina, that went on steroids because they saw that I was a little different than all of the other kids, my cousins that we were around. And my grandmother sent me to a VOTEC school that was really designed for high schoolers and people as an alternate path toward college. I was in a VOTEC school in middle school, and that's where I learned how to do mechanical drafting and drawing. So I started very, 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 very young doing that sort of stuff. So after moving back to New York and graduating from my first degree, which I obtained at LSU, it was a Bachelor's of Interior Design. I had no idea that there was a schism in the profession between interior designers and architects. I was told that, there's, some legislation coming up, and sooner or later you'll be able to practice as an interior designer and stamp your own drawings. There was this big conversation between License Act and practice and all of this other stuff, and then all of that just kind of fizzled out, and then NCIDQ came out, which is now, the licensing examination that people take to become interior designers, but it still limits what you can do. So my passion started actually from the inside, and then I kind of worked my way to the outside as I went through. While at Skidmore, I started going to night school at Pratt. And I obtained my undergraduate degree at Pratt in 3 years, so I spent 4 years here and 3 years there while working there, while at Pratt. And things were great. Making a lot of connections, meeting people, out there just trying to understand which direction or which path I'm going to take. And then I landed back in New York and interviewed for other jobs. And I got a whole bunch of other job opportunities, but then I bit the bullet, drank the Kool-Aid, and then I joined the Schweitzer Group. I ended up working at the Schweitzer Group for about 16 years. When I left, I was managing principal of the firm. And I said, you know what? This is not exactly what I need to be doing right now. For the very same reason that I chose to go to LSU, I wanted to create a name for myself. I wanted to be able to make my own space, my own connections, build my own thing. It was very important for me to just separate. So that's why I went to the Deep South to go to a big school of like 40,000 students. And that was also eye-opening for me because that was a life that I didn't know that I could have as well growing up in New York City. Really enjoyed it. So I came back and worked around a little bit, and then I started my first practice at the age of 27. I had a partner, gentleman by the name of Stephen Lowry. I don't know if you know Stephen.
Yes.
Okay, and one of the first projects that we had, which was a godsend, was doing work for Morgan Freeman. So we ended up designing his apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Then we ended up working on his house in Charleston, Mississippi. And then we ended up hiring some buddies of mine from LSU to do the landscaping. So they did 150 acres of landscaping, putting in paddocks and ponds and stables. And we did the house. And Stephen and I had a little falling out because we were from different schools. He was old school, and I was like, hey, let's look at this differently. Let's do this. So I left graciously and then ended back at the Schweitzer Group. And there I stayed until I was about 39, and I said, you know what? I really need to do something on my own to make my own space, my own name, because even though I love the firm, love the work that they do, but at the end of the day, it was my father sitting in the big office, and you know, it became so natural to just start calling him Lou instead of Dad. So even today now, it's like Lou, you know. So when I call him, hey Lou, how you doing? So it was that crazy. So I stepped off on my own back in 2007. I'm sorry, 2003. So that makes my firm now 20 years in practice since that departure, and started my own little firm. And you know, I had a lot of relationships, you know, a lot of friends, but everyone was afraid to work with me because of the relationship with Lou, and they didn't want to create any, you know, issues there. So I started off doing Papa John's, Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, churn work. I was churning out a project every 2 or 3 days, you know, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a pop, bing, bing, bing. Then the next thing you know, I'm saying, okay, we're getting good at this. Then we started doing bars, and then we started doing restaurants, and then we started doing other work. And then the corporate clients started to come in, and we started doing corporate office spaces and interiors, and then we started doing small additions on houses, and then small addition on houses turned into gut rehabilitations of entire warehouses that took almost an entire New York City block, replacing windows, putting in elevators, putting on new roofs, repurposing it, and converting it into a more usable or higher and better use of the spaces. So these are some of the spaces that we've worked on in recent history. So I just wanted to show you some of our work. This is a church in the Bronx. And that was a ground up building. These are interior spaces. This was in Harlem. We've done a whole bunch of these press juiceries and all of these other things. We helped them create that concept. Greenpoint and Williamsburg, a whole bunch of bars, restaurants. So we just try and just do our thing. We do it quietly. I don't need to be out there and advertising and just saying, hey, this is what we're doing and that's what we're doing. But I can tell you we have some massive work going on in our office. We are responsible for approximately 24, 25 New York City firehouses right now. We're building an EMS station from the ground up, and the list just goes on and on and on. And the one good thing about our firm and our practice is that we actually help others like us. And oftentimes we'll give them the support or just give them some tips or pointers or help them understand the type drawings that they need to get their work through, and have charged very little for that because it's important to give back. And there are a lot of folks out there that can speak to that, helping people get from one job to another and make a nice transition. Yeah, let's see. This was an entrance into a building that we converted. This was a warehouse building that had no windows. We put windows, elevators, cleaned it up, took an old loading dock and converted it into an entrance in Long Island City for the building. So, okay, that's it? Yeah. Okay, so that's my story. Obviously, there's so many other, you know, nuggets and things that we could talk about, but it's been a really exciting time, and you know, I look forward to having, you know, more in this conversation. I'm the byproduct of the Tandys and the folks that went through the, you know, Jim Crow South. My family migrated to New York as well. You know, we dealt with the civil rights movement during my childhood. You know, everybody had the picture of Martin Luther King, JFK, and Jesus Christ on the walls inside the house. That's just, but that's a part of the Black identity, right? I mean, how many of you can honestly say that you've not walked into a Black household at any point in your life and not experienced that image? And, you know, and then to live in some of the housing that was designed by some of these firsts, you know, and learning more about them, it's really exciting to me. And I'm like, okay, this is great. So it's, you know, this is my time, you know, me doing but I'd like to, you know, hear and understand what some of the younger people are doing too, because, you know, we as professionals, we should spend time mentoring a lot more than we do. Okay, time's up. We should spend time mentoring more than we do. And I just leave this as a challenge to you all. It's really important. I can't even begin to stress how important it is to bring someone in under your wing. It may seem like a nuisance because you're busy and you really want to do it and you want to do it right, so you don't do it. Just do it. It's very important because that person could be the next Tandy, Max Bond, Roberta Washington. I mean, there's so many people around us that, you know, we can really, you know, help get to that next level. So that's my challenge to you all.
All right, thank you so much, Mark, Roberta, Jack, and Greg, for giving us an overview of the history, your lives, and your connections to everything NYCOBA and NOMA. And now Stephen and I get to ask you some questions, you know, just based on some of the talks that we've had in preparation for this panel and evening tonight, which have been extremely enlightening. And I think that our questions will circle back to a lot of themes that you all touched upon, so you get to elaborate just a little bit more, and then we'll also open up for a few audience questions.
Hello, everyone. First, I want to say thanks for joining us and great job telling your stories. When we were planning this, we knew there was so much that we could talk about, so I'm very pleased that we got whatever it is that we got out of you, and so hopefully we can get some more from these questions. So starting with Jack, you mentioned how when you started your firm in 1985, and I knew about all of those clients that you had because when I was growing up, you were one of the big names that were out there. So I wanted to know what was the single event that represented the turning point once you started your firm? Did you plan it? How did you feel? And how did you build upon it? How did you carry the momentum?
No, I didn't plan anything. I have to tell you, I'm extremely, in one way, very lucky, very fortunate. First of all, I don't know how I got to SOM, and I really do mean that. They were the #1 firm in the world at the time, and Roy Allen was still there. He was one of the big managing partners that did all that heavy work in the 60s that they were known for. Gordon Bunshaft had just retired the year or two before I got there, and we had Allen's party the month I got there, his farewell party. So that legacy that was connected to the new set of partners when I got there. So when I started my own firm, I was just such an asshole, I think, that I could not work for anybody else. And so I was always arguing and so at one point I remember sitting, it was Christmas, and I think the president's motorcade was coming through on 42nd Street. I had just come out of the Grand Central Station, and I was sitting there crying because I didn't have a job and I didn't know where I was going. And I knew I couldn't work for anyone else. So I got two of my best friends from Lou Schweitzer's office together, and I said, we should start a firm. We didn't know what the hell we were talking about, you know, but we knew that we had energy, we were young, and we needed to do something else. So we got a house from one of the gentlemen. He was Italian. He got us a project with an Italian couple that was moving from Brooklyn to Staten Island, so we did the house. And the house was awful. It was just ugly and awful. And I was saying to myself, well, I want to design. I learned so much at SOM, so how do I get beyond this? So we disbanded after about 6 months after the house was done. Yeah, because I wasn't going to do that, right? And then all of a sudden, that same Italian guy, Walter Maffei is his name, Walter Maffei called me up and said, I know someone at Giorgio Armani, and she worked in our office in Brooklyn, an architect's office as a secretary. Now she's the head manager of the American division for Giorgio Armani, Kathy Campanile. And so he said, go see her, because I'm not a designer. He was a code man, code expert. He said, go see her. And I went to see her. And she said, well, Walter says you're good, then I think you're good. She didn't even look at my portfolio or anything. She said, okay. She goes, but you have to meet Gabriella Forte because Gabriella makes all the rules. She's second to Armani. So she came in about a week or two later. I wore all black to the meeting. She came into the room, she had on all black. And she's 5'3". She said, I like him, he's hired. And I kid you not. So then she left the room and she came back and she said, Mr. Travis, you are my architect and I'm your only client. How much? That's what she said to me. And I said, and she said, how much? And so I just said $20,000. One $20,000 retainer, $100 an hour. This is 1985. And she said, fine, write up a contract and you and my lawyers will fight it out. That's what she said. So I met somebody who I thought was truthful and honest with me, was trying to show me that, it doesn't have to be about fluff, that we can get right down to business and we can do things. And I said to myself, I'm going to die for her. I'm going to do everything I did. And I worked for Armani for 5 years. We did 12 of the boutiques. And we started the Emporio boutique concept at 16th Street and Ladies Mile and Fifth Avenue. And then I met Spike Lee because I was published in the magazine for that project. And that's how we got started.
So the next question is for Roberta. You are a pioneering Black woman in architecture with record-breaking accolades, including buildings above 96th Street, below 96th Street, and you also dedicate a lot of your time and purpose in architecture to researching the stories of Black men in architecture, of course, through the years and, from the beginning. And I know that this time also represents a transition in your career as you are working on your book, your upcoming book that will be published. So I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges you've experienced in uncovering the history of African Americans in architecture?
I guess the biggest challenge is that you could almost say that there isn't any to be found. I mean, it's hard to find the history, right? And part of what I know is because some of those people who I showed, whose pictures I showed very quickly, there are people who I got to know, like Eiffel Hanchard and Eiffel Johnson Hanchard. I worked for them at the end of their big run of success. And so I got to see how it was, and I got to talk to them about what it was that they did that made them successful, or how they thought it had an effect on what happened to them. But one of the things I noticed is that they took time to talk to employees who were like peons somewhere else. But yes, they took time to actually talk to folks, and they were interested in knowing why I was interested in architecture and what they could do to further it. So I think it was that. Max Bond was another person who was, I think, a great influence on me. And the fact that I got a chance to go to Africa with Max and a group that he put together from Columbia using a Kenny Fellowship. And that whole trip changed my life, right? It was a trip I didn't especially want to go on, but nobody else wanted to go. So I went, but because it introduced me to Africa, and it also introduced me to another way of thinking. So the way Max described what he was doing and why he had gone to Ghana at the independence of Ghana early on, is that he wanted an opportunity to give back based on the fact that he, living in the United States, thought he had more opportunities to become an architect or to do architecture than people in Ghana. And he wanted to do a project for them. And so I started, that was my introduction to thinking not just about my neighborhood. Yes, I'm also from the South, and yes, we had issues there. But then to think about not just that and clear how to fix things in this country, but to look at other places, and Africa called. And so I ended up spending 4 years in Mozambique before I started my firm. And I felt that, I think it was like the spirit of Max in terms of how he told his story about why he did what he did that made me realize that there are lots of ways to look at architecture, and there's lots of ways to look at a profession. And so those were views I got of the profession through the eyes of Max, I think.
Thank you. Next question is for Greg. So anyone who knows Greg knows that Greg is always has a plan. And I've known you for some time now, so it's interesting seeing your career path, and since I've known you. So that might be my phone. So my question is, what do you think Black architects are doing wrong or not enough of to have a stronger presence in the industry?
I don't think we talk to each other enough and collaborate with each other enough. And, you know, I said I don't think we talk with each other enough and collaborate with each other enough and pursue things together and you know, lean on each other's shoulders with our issues and talk about them so we can kind of work it out together. I really don't think that we do. Yeah, there may be one or two people that, you know, have close relationships. I know that, like, for example, you and Ibrahim have a great relationship. So I know that if you needed a shoulder to call on, that would be that person, but that's, you know, that circle. Yeah, so we need to broaden these circles and really figure out how to go after the nice, sweet, big projects together. You know, most of us are small firms, and when I say that, most Black architecture firms in the United States has 6 people or less. More often, it's more like 3 or 4. So, you know, in order to get the type projects that we're really pining to get and want to pursue, we really have to figure out a way to create a language to where we can, like, just get it and work. That's it. Forget about all of that other stuff. Like, I need to be in control. I need to be the one that's responsible for that. I need to be the person that needs to design. We need to get over our egos, and we need to really pull it together and collaborate in the true spirit of collaboration. And that's, in my view, that's it. It's very simple. Some may deny it. Most understand it because of experience. And, you know, and that's, you know, honestly, that's one of the reasons why NYCOBA was even created, was to create opportunities, because at that point in time, there were a lot of smaller firms, and they were not given opportunity in working on these large municipal projects that were being built all around them. So they got smart and they said, you know what, let's get together and let's talk about this. We need to put some pressure on this. We need to put some political pressure on this. We need to let people know that we exist. We need to let them know that we have the capability and the bandwidth to do this project. And if it means us grouping and pairing ourselves up together to do that work, then so be it. So we need to do more of that. That's a really bad question to give me, man. That's horrible. That's really nasty. But we need to be real with each other. And honestly, that I believe is our biggest stumbling block.
Yeah, I would agree. Great question and great answer. And I'm just going to briefly take a moment to plug our NYCObaNOMA Business Development Committee, which I know you, Greg, and Stephen and Ibrahim help lead. And it's really to revitalize, you know, that focus on Black firms and firm ownership within NYCOBA and throughout NOMA, as well as we work towards some of the things that Greg spoke about with regard to, you know, working with these agencies, demanding more transparency transparency, and also looking for ways and outlets for our firms and those that want to have their own firm to come together so that we can band together and, go after these projects and really thrive. So for the next question, I'll turn it over to Mark, and I know you gave a wonderful presentation really talking about, your background and your family lineage from the South and how that carried with you through, moving to New York, and those Southern roots, that resonates, with myself and Roberta and Greg and really all of us here on the panel tonight. And I think you explained a little bit how that really lends itself to your career over the years with regard from activism and design and community engagement. And my question for you is, how can architects, specifically young architects, continue to carry this idea forward in our careers in terms of community engagement and activism?
Sure. So that's an excellent question. So I would say join an organization like NYCOBA, become involved. We're always looking for volunteers and people to help put together programs, and so that's one way to do it. But also become involved in your community. I'm a former vice chairman of Community Board 12 in Manhattan, and so and Wayne Benjamin is in the audience. He's chair of the Land Use Committee for Board 12. And Roberta is a former chair of the Housing Committee for Board 10. So become involved in your committee through a community board. Get involved in politics. That's the way to really move it forward for us, because we need to become involved in the politics. That's the way Eiffel Johnson Hansard was able to get their project on 125th Street for the state office building. And we didn't even talk about the Jacob Javits Center, which was done by AIANY, which is a firm I worked for briefly, but it was also the associate architect for that project was Louis Straughter Turner, LST, Louis Straughter Turner. Frank Turner was a good friend of ours. We knew Frank very well. And Roberta could have done a slide just on Frank Turner. So, in fact, Frank, Percy Griffin, and Art Symes did a program here at the New York chapter of the AIA that's still available on Vimeo. So you can look that up online. Legends, it's called Legends, 3 Architects, 4 Decades.
Thank you. So my next question is for Jack. So it is no secret in the industry that you profoundly stepped away from being an active member of the AIA in 2016 after the election of Donald Trump due to the national political climate and certain thoughts and feelings throughout that, and even things that you saw reflected in organizations including the AIA. So my question is, being that tonight is the first night that you've returned to the Center for Architecture, to speak and participate on a panel. I know you've been to just a few sessions recently, attending in the audience. My question is, would you care to expound upon that decision that you made in 2016, and has your position with regard to being active in the AIA changed? Ironically amid a possible Trump re-election, but also we have Greg here, president of AIA New York, and Kim Dodell, president of AIA. So what are your thoughts on that? and we went over this. I told Jack I was going to ask him this.
Strap in. You're asking for it. So it's important to me to move Black aesthetics, Black identity forward. I'm not the kind of person who just socializes, although socializing I think is extremely important. But when I feel like it's too much of that and not enough forward progressive energy, I have to back away. And I'll tell you, the Center for Architecture has been great to me. And I can come back, I can call anyone here and they'll take my call. Same with NYCOBA-NOMA, same with NOMA National, and even same with the National AIA. Like Greg said earlier, we have to get over egos. We have to collaborate. I can be in my space, but I know that there are other people and other associations around the profession I chose that I need to always collaborate with. If for nothing else, it's for young people to see that they can have a strong vision that's different from the rest of the crowd and still be a part of the crowd. And that's what I think I'm trying to do. Now, part of the reason that I stepped away was this. Donald Trump got elected president and then said that he was going to spend billions of dollars in infrastructure and never did a thing. And I said to myself, where is NOMA? Where is AIA? I called up every president and vice president I could because I knew them all at both agencies plus here in New York. And I said, where is the sting? Where is the letter? Because now we have to take a stand. And nobody was willing to take a stand. And now I understand it in 2016, it was very, very difficult to understand just what a loser this guy was going to be and just what we were going to lose. But even at that point, I was saying to myself, if we don't step forward, I'm not going to be a part of anything that doesn't. And then I said to myself, well, maybe I shouldn't be so harsh. Maybe I should be. And then this white guy from Virginia sends this letter to Robert Ivey, who was the head of AIA at the time, and he quit. There's a white guy from Virginia. That's below the Mason-Dixon line. And I said to myself, what the hell are we doing? We have to now be Malcolm X. We have to, it really is about the fight now. The Republicans have chosen to fight. Democrats are not fighting. We're afraid, right? So my now direction is to make it as black as possible. That's what I'm trying to do. But that doesn't exclude that other people have different mindsets. But that's what I'm doing, right? So I now have a not-for-profit organization, a 501c3, and it's called Afri-Culture. And in that, we talk about a black aesthetic, because to me, that's really the only thing that's missing in the lexicon of the possibilities of what architecture needs to do for black people in this world, right? We have people who are environmentalists. We have people who are collaborators on technical aspects. We have people who understand materials and regionalism. We don't need to do that kind of stuff. What we need to do and what we don't have is a black identity. And I'll end with this. When I was at the 2009 convention of AIA in St. Louis, this black entrepreneur was keynote speaker the Saturday night, the last night of the convention. Steve Lewis was the president. And he got this guy named Mike Jones. Mike Jones stands up. He's not even an architect, but he's a multi-millionaire entrepreneur. The first thing out of his mouth says that if an alien came to this earth after all of us humans were gone, and the aliens looked at the contribution of what humans made, what would that alien think? Well, that alien would see all kinds of myriads of architecture, he said, except for one, the lack of a modern identity for the African. And I could not believe it. I woke up in my chair, and he said, that's what we're missing. Well, he said, we have to get paid as well, but we're missing a black aesthetic, right? And I couldn't believe that, and I said to myself, well, why aren't we listening to this? So I went to everybody at my table, and I said, did you guys hear that? Did you guys hear that? Did you guys hear that? And still today, it's not something that we as black architects talk about. We're still talking about collaboration, about getting rid of our egos and collaborating. But I can tell you what's missing is that we don't have an identity in architecture, and not every black person has to do it. But if a critical mass of people sought an aesthetic, we would change the palette of architectural possibilities in this country, in Western civilization, with a black identity. And so that has just been my focus. So I have left the throngs in order to pursue that. But as I said before, like people like you, Allison, coming and doing what you're doing, and Pascal and Kim Dowdell. I have to still be a part. So if you guys call me, I'm coming, but I'm letting you know it better be black. Thank you.
Great answer. So the next question is for Roberta. And so, Roberta, I personally, my former employer worked for you, and several of my mentors worked for you. So I kind of feel like I'm part of your architecture tree, especially growing up in Harlem and literally walking around and seeing your buildings while I was growing up. So I want you to speak about the Black Firm. Please talk about some of the challenges you and your colleagues face in your early years. And also the second part is talk about some of the things that make you proud when you see some of the emerging firms of today.
Yeah, so that first part, that's time. I think one of the things that was most prominent was that first of all, it's like why Black folks started firms, right? And you know, the fact that you got to the point where you started a firm of your own, knowing nothing, knowing not what to do, but just because you couldn't see another alternative. And I think that I was like in the time of architects who were like starting firms because they didn't find a place for themselves in other firms. So I started a firm, and I started it because I couldn't think of what else to do. And I would have been, I wanted, I guess, to, or preferred to have been an associate in someone else's firm. Actually, the firm I was working in last. I would have preferred to have been an associate to there. But then I realized that, you know, to be an associate requires something, some things maybe that I didn't have, and that was the ability to relate to the head of the firm in a way that could result in my being at least an associate, right? And I didn't see anything else. The only other thing was what had happened to other Black architects, and that is that they start a firm. So I said, okay, I guess I'm starting a firm because I have to stay in the business, and yet I don't see a way to climb up the way I wanted to. But I met other folks who felt the same way. Like I did know Frank Turner, and I did know other Black architects who were like looking for a path, right? And it ended up being the only one that was available, right? And it was scary, but I also depended on Eiffel Johnson and the people, the other Black architects who I had known, to help me, to mentor me still. And I mentored other folks. And I used to call up Frank Turner and ask him what would he do if, you know, and then tell him something. And I luckily got into a class. There was a class, some national organization for women in economic development, and they had classes like every 2 weeks for a couple of hours down on 42nd Street. But classes really filled in some voids. There were all kinds of things that I didn't know what I was, you know, that I didn't know how to feel. And I think that being able to depend on either some help from friends or from organizations is really important. Because some things you just don't know, and if you try it without knowing what you're doing, you have really bad time, so.
All right, Greg, so question for you. I did not say it in the beginning, but you know, just to announce for anybody that does not know, you are the first Black president of AIA New York, and it's 167 years. So congratulations again and forever to you for this amazing milestone. And I know that you've discussed and we've talked about your theme of belonging and how important it is for us as architects and designers to make sure that we're being cognizant of the individuals of citizens when we're designing and doing our work. And I just want to ask you, how has your experience as being a Black man in architecture really inspired your theme of belonging and what you look to carry forward during your AIA presidency?
That's an intense question. It's very difficult to talk about the experience. There's a Jamaican expression, those who know it knows it. And, it's hard to talk about how, my sense of belonging and how I feel about that, me personally. But I can, as an architect, see that we are in a position to do incredible things if we just put our pencils down and start listening to the people that are impacted most by displacement, by lack of education, economic, wealth and experience. We need to really sit down and understand their problems so we know how to move forward in correcting these problems. And as architects, this deals with their physical space. We need to understand those things that they need in order to thrive in society. Shelter is a basic element to that. And we need to make sure that we understand that we're doing that right. We need to understand that all of the other spaces that we're designing for people to occupy and thrive in are well-intentioned, not developer-driven. I got, $1 billion, I want to build 6 buildings in a complex, and, we have to meet all of the codes, and it has to look nice, and put all of that behind you at first. Start from square one. Really get on the ground and engage the community and get them involved in that process. That is the only way that I think that you can have a truly successful project, hands down. It may look nice, you may win awards for it, you may be able to talk about it, but at the end of the day, it's something that has an overarching impact on not just the folks that are living in it today, but for generations to come. So it's very important to deal with that. With my sense of belonging, I thought I was pretty clear about that in the images that I showed living in the Bronx. I can tell you, growing up in the Bronx, or early on in the Bronx, in the mid to late 60s into the early 70s, if you know anything about the history of New York, the Bronx has a lot going on during that time that was not good for anyone. You had constant fires, buildings burning down. You had a heroin crisis. You had gangs finally coming into New York at a pace that was just incredible, and people killing people. You had people building housing and stacking people up on top of each other, where you had people living next door to you, on either side, across the hall, below you and above you, and you don't even know their names. And yet you pass them every single day in these buildings that you live in. You have every single experimental housing project. The Bronx has been the playground of that. If you go one block and you'll see modular housing, the next block you'll see old tenement buildings, the next block or mega block you'll see a tower in the park, with concrete park benches and concrete checkerboard tables, and a little green space in the front with steel pipes with chain link, or just loose chain creating barriers, all hard surfaces, basketball courts, asphalt. This is why I have all of these cuts and bruises on my head, by the way. Playing basketball in the streets in the hood. That was a part of that life. Incinerators burning in buildings, and you had this acrid odor, wafting through buildings, in these buildings. And some of these buildings are still incredibly contaminated from the byproducts of all of these things. And we're now just starting to address these things. So when you speak about belonging, these images that I had growing up are the things that really propelled my look into this whole theme about belonging and beyond. I think that once other people understand it, or those who know it knows it, starts to spread the word so others know it, then you'll have an opportunity to start making changes to make, you know, this environment that we all live in that much safer, that much more humane, and, you know, and then with that comes the most important thing, a piece of dignity. And with that piece of dignity, your head is clear. You think about education, you think about school, you take ownership in the spaces that you live in because you're proud of them. So you do other things to make those things stay around and maintain them very differently. But to be thrown in housing with VAT flooring, concrete block wall hallways, studded metal elevator panels in the doors to make them anti-graffiti and vandalism proof, with, you know, perforated metal light coverings to keep someone from screwing out the elevator lights, to, that's insane. And this is what we as architects had been designing for the longest time in this city of New York, and give it to the most disadvantaged folks and say, this is you have to make home here, and you have to be comfortable here, you have to raise your family here, and if you're upward, you know, and you're moving on in life and you're able to move downtown the way that we were able to do, then it's different. You have a choice in that, say, but a lot of people don't. And we have to be mindful about that as humans. That's what we as architects should be doing. We need to be at the front of that conversation and be intentional about every single thing that we do when it comes to designing for others, hands down. That's what it's all about.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really great way to wrap up the panel here. I do want to open it up to maybe just one or two audience questions. You know, thank you again for coming, and I really hope that you all have gotten something out of their individual journeys, as well as a little bit of our history, as well as some more information from some of the questions that Stephen and I put together. So if there are any questions in the audience, I'm not sure if we have a handheld at all, but just, you know, stand up. Project. Oral, is that you, Oral, I see? And someone in the back.
Oral, go to mic.
Yeah. Come up to the mic, yes.
You can't pass it. You can't pass it.
From here?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm part of the crew here.
And that next person should probably come up now.
Okay, no, my question is, I guess it's to Roberta also, and maybe any of you guys on the stage here. But why do you think firms in the 1970s, like LJM, Bonrider, James also, did not grow and become legacy firms like SOM, KPF, BBB? And what do you think happened? I guess, you know, this is for Roberta to talk about what happened and what's the difference between us trying to develop a firm like that and us not getting to being legacy firms.
Borrowing capacity. Yeah, I think that it's, you know, architecture is, maybe you think of it as an art, but it is a business. And one thing is not understanding all of the things you need to understand to, or have access to people to be your mentors who understand those things that have to do with financial issues. And I think that when I look at the firms that I talked about here today and other firms, Black firms, and what happened to them, why did they go out of business? It has to do with financial issues, financial capacity, and not being able to borrow as much when you need it, but also not understanding issues of money that have to do with the day-to-day existence. And I guess I think that's the main reason. And when I look at those firms there, that was the issue in most of those cases. It wasn't that they didn't know how to design, and it wasn't that they didn't know how to run an office, but that part of running an office that talks about, you know, financial things, I think is an area that many firms need help in. And it's not just black firms. I mean, white firms need help too, but I think that they may have other folks to talk to. If I hadn't taken that course that I was mentioning before about women, economic development, whatever, it was like a whole eye-opening thing. I hadn't even thought of that. I didn't even know I had a problem. I didn't until I went there. You know, it's like one of the examples of how far away I was from what was really happening was that there was an accountant there who came. They had an accounting session, and so an accountant was there, and he was talking about rules that everybody knows. If you have an office, these are things he says that people know, right? And one of the things he said was that if you have an office, the person who opens your mail shouldn't be the person who writes your checks. Okay. Now, I had never really thought about that. And so I said to him, well, you know, it's like I have a small office, and so that person is the same person. You know, I don't have a choice in it. And he says, no, it's a rule. You can't do that. Everybody knows you can't do that, you know. And I didn't understand why. And finally, I made him tell me, and he said it's because it makes it easy for someone to forge your name or write checks, and you know. And I just thought that this was the craziest thing. But I went back and I told the person who opened my checks and who wrote my checks and opened my mail, now don't do that, you know. So from now on, you're going to give me the mail with the bank statement not open. And she said, okay, but then the next month it was open, and she says, I forgot. And then I said, okay, look, so don't do that. Just you know. The next time, it looked like it was open, but I couldn't tell for sure. And then the third month, when it was time for the bank statement to come, she quit. And then I found out that she'd stolen like $6,000 from me. And it never occurred to me that was even a possibility. If I hadn't taken that course, it would not have been something I was like thinking on. I was thinking about how to get a better job and how to do better projects. But there are things about running an office that you have to be aware of that many of us don't have the opportunities because we don't know people who themselves are confident enough to be able to explain to us what some of the issues are. So I just think that, yes, being able to take a course or to have mentors who can translate to you and transmit to you all the kinds of things you have to know in addition to design is really important. So that's my thing.
Can I quickly just piggyback on that? And it's already 8:30, you know. So I have a different take on that, as you might guess. It seems to me, after more than 20 years of studying this issue, that for black architects in this country to succeed, you have to change culture and you have to change behavior, the two most difficult things to change. I was in Beijing before COVID, and I went to a train station to take a bullet train to Shanghai. And the student who I went to visit from Pratt, who now has an office of 22 people, I said to him, so where are the tickets? How do we get to the train? Blah, 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 blah. He said, here are the tickets. Go to the train, wait with everybody else. And I go, well, are we going to be able to get a seat? Blah, blah, blah. He goes, don't worry. We get to the train, the fastest train in the world, as we all know. We get to the train. There's no panic. There's no lining up. People are just waiting. And when the train is ready, everybody goes to the train. No pushing and shoving. Why? Because on your ticket, it says the train, the car, the seat. Everything is there. And so nobody's pushing, right? That's a culture. If you try to get on Amtrak here, particularly if the train's late, we don't care, right? So it goes to something like that. When it comes to architecture, we don't have the network. We don't have black clients. Most of our clients are white, or they're government. When I did my book, 35 architects profiled, every single office was doing over 60% of their work in government sector. These were the top black architects in the United States. This was 1990. And I'm saying to everybody, this is an issue. We don't have the black clients. Everybody's doing work for people who don't look like you. And when you do work for people who look like you, it's with somebody else's money. Well, that's the problem, right? So I say, well, you should say, Jack, do you have a solution? Yes, I have a solution, right? In every black community, there is the church. There is the housing project. There is the residential component that is always lacking. If black architects just focus for 20 years on just that, we still graduate most of the black architects from the HBCNUs. So we have a network. We have 7 programs that graduate almost 51% of the black architects. Well, where is that connection to the people who are building in the community? And the churches is where you do architecture, and the community buildings and the housing is where you do infrastructure, right? There is a pathway, but guess what? A lot of pastors won't hire us. And you go to Chicago, for instance, where my biological father lives, and most of the black churches are done by white and even Asian architects, right? So we don't have a network, we don't have a culture, and we have to start to think about those larger issues before we can actually start getting done. And Max Bond was a great architect. He was a great humanist, a great person, and a great architect, and he could not pull that company to a legacy company. So what is it for the rest of us?
Just one last quick question, and then we'll close out. Thank you. We'll be kicked out.
Hi, I just have to know, with so many proposals and qualifications calling for MWBE firms, why are we not leading these projects and why are we not getting them? There's just so many proposals out there that are like, we need this amount of MWBE firms, and they're big projects, and I just don't understand why I don't see us in those projects.
I don't think we have enough time, but maybe Greg, you want to?
I'm here. I want to hear it.
I think Greg, just, quick summary. And to be continued. Thank you.
Okay. Recentering. Okay. Listen, I have to tell you, there's a lot of crazy shit going on out there. All right, and we have to understand that, unfortunately, and we have to try and work within the systems that are in place to get to at least the first level. The fact of the matter is that I don't like it, but that's just the way it is currently, and we're going to have to work with that. I know that there's a lot of us in this room that are quietly advocating with governmental and quasi-governmental agencies and discussing this very same issue. And the first question that always comes up is, well, we don't know who you are, so how do we know that, we didn't know that this black firm existed. We didn't know that you had 15 people. We didn't know that you could do this work. Where have you been? And then when you surface, then you have to go through, fill out this paper, fill out that form, do this, do that, get pre-qualified, sit down, have conversations, talk about it, try and build a rapport, build a relationship, show them your work, get all of that other stuff in play. And then you might move to the next level if an RFP comes out and you respond in a way that catches their attention. I do know that there are a lot of agencies in the city of New York, like I said, that we're working with right now, that we are trying to create programs to develop firms to where you're not just that person pursuing the 30% or the 20% on a project, because to me, that's peanuts, right? So if you go for peanut work and that's your sole focus, then you'll get peanut work. If you collaborate and you join forces with some of your, partners out there in crime in the industry, develop relationships with majority firms to where you sit down and talk about reasonable fees for the work that you're doing, and not have them cherry pick the portions of the jobs that they want and then give you the proverbial or historical bathrooms and the bathroom stalls that we used to hear, then, you know, nothing's going to change. You have to activate and advocate for you and your firm at all times, because no one is going to give it to you. At the end of the day, full stop. That's really what needs to happen. You need to advocate for yourself. It's unfortunate. I personally have joined teams and gone after work and have gotten minority portions of jobs, and I've gone after work and I've gotten prime jobs. But it's all about time, circumstance, situation, your capabilities at that point in time. There's a whole bunch of optics that go with that. How you present yourself out there in public, whether or not if people feel comfortable with you as an individual. I mean, there's all kinds of interpersonal dynamics coupled with capabilities. It's a really big cluster, XYZ. But once you understand that system and you start pitching and pursuing work in a way that checks all of those boxes, I think you can get farther. But if you want the 30% work, go for it. You'll get it, okay? But that's all you get. I think the key is really to situate yourself to where you can go for prime work. And then you decide who's on your team. Unless you have some fantastic relationship with a lot of the major firms, and you have a really open and you know, healthy dialogue and relationship, you won't be getting it that way. That's all you're going to get, the 30%. And that's not what it's about. I know that SCA has a program that they're working on right now to provide some upward mobility for smaller firms. I know that the DDC is trying to emulate a similar program that the SCA is looking at and doing. And I know that, you know, there are all of these agencies, MTA, the Port Authority, all of these folks are really trying hard to get us to come in and do the business, but it's how we project. We got to put, if you want to look like $1 million, sometimes you unfortunately have to spend $1 million. And that I think is part of what Roberta is saying. It's all about being able to have that, you know, that line of credit to where you can draw upon and not feel threatened or intimidated by it once you start drawing on it and not being able to pay it back, to staff up to get, you know, the work done or go for bigger projects. Unfortunately, there's a lot of expense. Preparing proposals for these big jobs is voluminous. It is incredibly thick. I mean, and most people don't even look through all of that stuff, but it's a box that you have to check to get to the next level. So my thing is 30% is okay, but I'd rather go for the prime work if I can. In my capacity, if I could do it, I would do that first. And if not, then maybe I would consider that if the work is sexy and it meets what I need to do as an architect. Because for me, you know, that first impression that a person gets when they walk into a space, that's what I'm about. I'm not about bathroom stalls and picking tiles and using boilerplate standards and dropping them into a drawing and providing another office, you know, 10 people and sticking them in their office and doing their work while I could be utilizing that staff a lot more efficiently if they were working out of my office. It costs me to do something like that. Therefore, I don't do it. But there are a lot of firms that will. And, you know, you just have to choose on which direction you want to go, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's great. Sorry to cut you off, Greg, but I think to succinctly wrap up, you know, just taking from everyone, but specifically, you know, Greg, going after prime projects, I think that's what we're all about. And I think to Jack's Black identity and architecture, you know, really working with that and, you know, pushing, you know, Black in architecture forward. So with that, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.